Shall we start?
Yeah.
Joanna and Victoria, shall we start or would you like to
Sure,
wait?
that's fine.
Yeah, I'm fine. So,
All right.
thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the virtual VietTESOL International Convention 2021. My name is Ian Chan and my colleagues Tan Le. We will be the moderators for this session. On behalf of the organizing committee, we would like to thank you for your participation and contribution. We're delighted to see all of you in live virtual presence today, especially in this feature session. We do hope that all of you will be able to have some valuable knowledge and experience as takeaways following the talk.
All right, just a little housekeeping before we get started. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the chat box in the Zoom control panel. We will bring them up during the Q&A session at the end of this presentation. Now, without further ado, we'll turn the time over to Victoria Clark and Johanna Motteram, our presenter today. Dr. Victoria Clark's field of expertise is assessment of English as a second foreign language. She has published several books on GEPT test preparation and has presented in conferences around the world. She worked as an EFL teacher and teacher trainer before specializing in language assessment. Her research interests include performance-based testing, teaching and assessing writing, validity of speaking tests, and task complexity. Dr. Johanna Motteram works in the global assessment team in the British Council. Her roles involves in conceptualizing, delivering, and evaluating assessment solution for institutional and government clients. She has taught English and applied linguistics and research aspect of teaching, learning, and assessment in a variety of contexts. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you everyone for joining us in this presentation on a Saturday. Today we're going to be talking about the comprehensive learning system and how that system can help improve learning outcomes and outcomes for students. But before I talk about the comprehensive learning system, I'd like to just quickly explain what we mean by all our ducks in a row. In English, when we say I have all my ducks in a row, it means that I am organized, I am well prepared, and I have thought about all those details necessary to make sure that when I go into the next step of whatever I wish to do, that I'm fully prepared and the next step can be successful. In education reform programs or in any initiative to improve student learning or our teaching, we need all our ducks in a row. And we believe that the comprehensive learning system helps us to get our ducks in a row. So you'll see a duck theme throughout our presentation. So next slide, please, Joanna. Just very quickly, in this presentation, I'll talk about what I mean by alignment. And I'll also talk about the problems of not being aligned and a model for helping people to align their elements in their learning system. Then we'll give you 4 case studies from projects that we are working on all around the world, how we have worked with this model to bring about better success in these projects and for student outcomes. And then we'll talk briefly about the implications for Vietnam. So let's start with the first slide. As you can see, I have a nice triangle here. Now, when I talk about alignment, I talk about elements in a learning system being compatible and working together. These elements are forming the points of my triangle. At the top, we have here curriculum. When I talk about a curriculum, I'm talking about intended learning outcomes for our students and learners. The other point of a triangle is assessment. When I'm talking about assessment, I'm talking about the methods and tools we use to measure or evaluate student learning or proficiency. And here, delivery, which is our third point of the triangle, delivery here is talking about all those factors involved in delivering the curriculum. In other words, the teaching methodology, the tasks we use in class, the materials we use, the textbooks we use. So everything in order to deliver that curriculum, even the way perhaps our classroom is set out. What we believe in the comprehensive learning system is that these broad aspects, these elements affect learning. All these elements affect learning in very influential ways. And more importantly, all of these elements are interdependent. They are not separate from each other. One influences the other. And alignment here means that we align these elements together. So we look at the intended outcomes from the curriculum, we measure with assessment those outcomes, and we deliver in our classrooms those objectives to reach those outcomes. Of course, this is not new to anybody. This is quite clear. We also know that alignment is a characteristic of effective education. And we know the better aligned these elements are, the more likely we are to lead to success. But we also have a lot of examples of misalignment, where these elements don't match, don't fit together. Let me give you an example. Let's say we have a new curriculum for English, which is based on the 4 skills of reading, writing, listening, speaking. It's communicative in nature, so focuses on communicative competence. I know Dr. Nick Saville mentioned a lot of what we're going to be talking about today, so you've heard this already. Let's say we have this great new curriculum in a country or in a school, yet the teachers are not trained in this new curriculum. They do not have adequate materials or books to assist them with this curriculum. We can safely say that the teaching will not deliver the intended outcomes of that curriculum. Here's another example. Let's take the same new curriculum, 4 skills, communicative in nature, and let's say that we have the same old tests as before. So those traditional grammar, multiple choice tests with reading texts, but no speaking, perhaps not even writing. We can safely say that in the classroom, the teachers won't focus so much on this communicative nature, on these speaking outcomes. And it will be quite obvious that when our students leave school or leave the course, they won't actually have those outcomes that the curriculum intended for speaking or writing if the test isn't aligned. So it's quite clear that alignment is absolutely necessary for success and is not something new. What is new, next slide, Joanna. What is new is that, so what's interesting is even though this is not new and this is clear and this is obvious, there doesn't seem to be any guidelines or a lot of framework to help us to actually align, to support us in aligning these elements, those curriculum, that assessment, that delivery part. So around the world, we've been working on projects, my team, and we have noticed that this misalignment issue has caused a lot of education reform failures, or at least certainly not the success that they were hoping for. So we've devised a quick model that we have been using in our projects to support that alignment from national level, from national policy, right down to the individual classroom and the individual course. So I'm going to present that now, and then afterwards we'll give 4 studies where we've tried to implement that, and that has led to more success. So the first part of this model. Now, in the first part of this model, before I even look at the curriculum or the assessment or the delivery part, I need to understand the big picture, the context in which this alignment is taking place. Now, these concepts here on your screen are not new. These concepts have been used in curriculum development work, in material development work. We're just using them now for our alignment. So what are these elements? Well, here I have principles, environment, and needs. By principles, what I mean is I need to know from all our stakeholders involved in the alignment, from our teachers, our test developers, our curriculum designers, our teacher training agencies, even our ministry representatives, what are their thoughts, beliefs, perspectives, approaches to language, language learning, language teaching, and language assessment. We need to understand our stakeholders' principles because these can cause opportunities or barriers to the alignment. The next thing I need to know is the environment. When I mean environment, let's take a school, for example. I want to align the school's curriculum with the test and the delivery. Well, in the school, I need to know the age of the students, how many years they've been studying English, how long, how many lessons a week. Are they motivated? Do they have good resources? What about their teachers? How trained are they? How good is their English proficiency? This is the environmental factors, the situational factors that will really influence this alignment project that we're working on. And then finally, I need to look at the needs. When I mean needs, I don't just mean what these stakeholders need, but also what they lack. And perhaps more importantly, what they want. What teachers, for example, want is sometimes very different to what they need. So we need to understand all these contextual factors, all this background information in order to look at the next stage. Anna? So the next stage then is, now we have this great information, we can start working on a plan for the alignment, the assessment, or the alignment of assessment curriculum delivery. It's really important when I say the word plan, because once we have the background information, we work with our teams and we devise an implementation plan for the alignment. In other words, we look at the curriculum, look at the objectives and the outcomes, look how the assessments are actually focusing on those and to what extent and to what proficiency, and look at the delivery. So we devise a plan to support the alignment. But the most important part of this plan is, can I have the next slide, is that we constantly evaluate our plan to ensure that the consequences of our plan are positive. So obviously, I know Dr. Nick Saville talked about washback. Washback is essential. Positive washback is essential. Ultimately, everything we do, and I work in language testing, everything we do is about the learner. Good language tests should encourage good language learning and good language then proficiency from our learners and our students. If we notice that there are some positive consequences of our plan, we continue. But in the evaluation of our plan, we notice that we're not getting the intended outcomes, then we have to stop, revise, and refocus. So in other words, our plan is dynamic. At various stages, we stop, evaluate, and then we, based on our evidence, we move forward. That's really important because many plans are implemented without stopping and evaluating throughout. And therefore, sometimes at the end, we don't get those intended outcomes. So going on to the next slide, I'm going to give you an example of a project that I'm working on with my team in Croatia. And this project is basically about aligning the new tests to the new curriculum. So let's have a quick look at Croatia first. Croatia is a beautiful small country in Europe. If you see that boot shape, there's Italy, so you can see it's quite Italy near Austria. And very ambitiously, a few years ago, with the support of the British Council, the Croatian Ministry introduced a brand new curriculum for all subjects for all years in school. Now, this curriculum is live this year. So the teachers are already teaching the new curriculum this year. And the government then, the ministry, asked my team, Global Assessments, to help them support the testing agency in ensuring that these new tests they're going to develop for end of school, so exit of school, entry into university in all subjects, there's new tests being developed. They want the British Council, a part of a project, to help them to align these tests to the curriculum, make sure it's aligned. So what did we do? Let's implement that plan. So in the next slide, you'll see here, first thing, we looked at the first phase of our model. We sat down with a variety of stakeholders. Now you'll see here, these stakeholders didn't just involve this testing agency, they involved the ministry officials, the curriculum developers, the teachers, principals, teacher agency, teacher trainers, teacher mentors. So a whole range of stakeholders, we worked with them with various instruments, focus groups, workshops, one-on-one Skype chats, personal visits to Croatia, questionnaires, etc. And we gathered all that information about those principles, environment and needs. Now, what I'm going to do now is just give you a snapshot of some of the information that we received from this highly important initial task. And then you can see how some of this information are actually barriers to what we wanted to do. And we're so glad we had this information first. Obviously, there was information that was very positive. I'm just going to focus on some concerns. First of all, in this information gathering, I found out that teachers, though they loved the new curriculum in English because it was communicative, it was focused on the 4 skills, it really had intercultural competence components. It was a great curriculum. They loved to teach and test grammar at the end of school. They wanted to test grammar separately through multiple choice at the end of school because that's what they're used to. That's what they're comfortable with. That's what they're confident in. So this was obviously a bit of a barrier to us, considering the assessments were going to be communicative in nature. The next thing we noticed is that the textbooks the teachers use are based on the old curriculum. They haven't been changed. So the teachers were teaching the new curriculum with textbooks from the old curriculum. So that was quite a concern. We also noticed that despite having a lot of teacher training opportunities in this new curriculum, for example, in English, the teachers are clearly busy and they weren't able to take up those trainings because of time constraints or accessibility. So that was a concern. And interestingly, we noticed that for each subject in the Croatian curriculum, there were only a few specialized test writers. So we thought we needed to remedy that. And then finally, just another snapshot of some information. We noticed that the teachers were very concerned about their own assessment skills. They told us that at the end of the year, they use summative assessment to obviously assess whether their students have reached the objectives. But here's the problem. Results of those tests, their own homemade tests, did not correspond with the results of the test that the students then took for external standardized tests on the curriculum. So this was a huge concern. So going forward, what did we do? So next slide. Well, first of all, even though this was about aligning assessment to the curriculum, our project team involved all of those stakeholders. We insisted that the project team were not just the testing specialists, but we involved those who had to develop the curriculum in the first place in each subject. We involved expert teachers, teacher training agencies, teacher mentors, we call them, and a whole host of other stakeholders that are involved indirectly or directly in this education reform program. Why? Because we believe, going back to the comprehensive learning system, that assessment and curriculum are not independent from each other, and they're certainly not independent from delivery. So we had a whole host of stakeholders working together. And one aspect, if you look at the assessment side, is we gave everyone item writing training. Item writing training for the test specialist was obviously much more specialized than for the teacher mentors or the curriculum, but everyone received training in how to write tests. Why? Because the test specialist needed to build capacity, but also the other stakeholders needed to learn so that they can devise training materials for teachers on how to do better summative assessment. We also looked at the curriculum. If you want me to align the test to a new curriculum, I need to understand the curriculum. I need to understand what the curriculum is, the objectives of the curriculum, and more importantly, not only what you want intended to learn, but how well at each stage of the learning process. So at the end of school, how well am I supposed to know how to write an essay, or how well? So we noticed in the curriculum that there was a little bit of, it wasn't so clear for our teachers who were delivering the curriculum and for our testers who were trying to write tests according to the curriculum about these elements of exactly what and how well. So throughout our project, we are adding clarifications to the curriculum. Now, a curriculum is a limited document. It's not the fault of the curriculum, but we did realize that for teachers to be successful, test writers to be successful, we needed extra information on the curriculum. And then from the delivery side, because the teachers were involved in this project, throughout this alignment project, we are constantly working on documentation, training, how to make this idea, all that we're learning about the curriculum and the tests accessible to teachers in a large scale and self-access as well as face-to-face. So that was a very important part of this project, was to bring that delivery part in, bring that teacher support in, as you can see from the title. And just the last point here, just to note that the curriculum was not based, the English curriculum, on standards such as the CFR. They wanted the curriculum to be the standards. And in order for them to do that, we needed that additional information that I spoke about, the clarity on what exactly at each year level and how well, what does success look like at each year level. So we're working a lot on that project. So initially, from a project that was supposed to align a test to a curriculum, it became a lot more, shall we say, coherent, aligned. So I'll move on to my colleague now. Joanna's going to now talk about some more case studies.
Thanks very much, Vicky. And I hope that I'm here on screen and everyone can hear me. I'm going to be speaking, first of all, about Japan and the BCTS, where BCTS stands for the British Council Tokyo University of Foreign Studies Test of Speaking for University Entrance. Very long, so we just say BCTS. And in this case study, I'll be talking about some elements of the principles, environment and needs, so the context associated with introducing a new test of English language spoken proficiency in Japan and for university entrance. So it's quite an interesting case study. So since April 2017, British Council and Tokyo University of Foreign Studies have been collaborating on a project to develop a speaking test for university entrance. Now, the introduction of speaking in university entrance exams has been a priority at government level in Japan for some time, and this exam is a contribution to this. In Japan, universities set their own entrance tests, and then those assessments have an impact on the rest of the educational system. So teachers and students align their studies and their preparation for the exam with the entrance tests of the universities they want to aim for. So it's a slightly different educational system that we're introducing this new test into. It's quite a challenge because, as Vicky was saying before, some of those existing tests, those existing university entrance tests, are quite traditional, and introducing a speaking test into that environment is quite challenging. So this is the beautiful BCTS, and it's what we call a localized test of speaking. We work with Tokyo University of Foreign Studies, or Tokyo Gaidai, to develop the items to international standards and then deliver them using the APTIS delivery system. And other elements of the localization include the delivery mode. We use a tablet for BCTS instead of a laptop or a desktop computer. So it's a computer-based test of speaking. And we have double marking for all test performances in BCTS because the test is used for a very high stakes purpose. So it's university entrance. It's a very serious test. So that brings with it some certain beliefs, principles, needs, environment, context that we need to consider as we're introducing this into an education system. So big issues for us as we're introducing this test of speaking are beliefs in Japan and within the education system there about what speaking is and how you should teach speaking, and actually what we're doing when we're speaking. So when we're speaking, are we just making sounds? Are we making sounds and rhythms? Or are we interacting with someone else? Or are we producing information? And so these are interesting questions, which are not necessarily the same beliefs in Japan as there are in Australia, say, where I was educated, or in other contexts. There are also beliefs about fairness. As I mentioned before, university entrance tests are very high stakes. And traditionally in Japan, they've been delivered in very set ways. Multiple choice assessment of grammar and vocabulary knowledge, reading comprehension, again, multiple choice, some translation, quite challenging translation from Japanese to English or from English to Japanese. So there are some concerns in the community that if we assess speaking as part of this decision making, there might be bias towards learners who've studied overseas, or that speaking might not be reliably assessed. So these are some of the challenges that we've needed to address. So how have we done this? Beliefs about speaking, the very first thing we've done has gone to link to the standard. So when we've been looking at the context, then we're looking at the standard. And in Japan, it's the CEFRJ that we're linking our test to. And the CEFRJ clearly describes what learners at different levels can do when speaking English, both as spoken interaction and spoken production. We've been doing a lot of work, a lot of different communications work, including webinars, videos, meetings, documents, so candidate guides, technical documents, to explain what we do when we assess speaking. But we're also working on, so that's the assessment, but we're also working on educating people about the delivery. So we do sessions on how we think teachers should teach speaking and how candidates should prepare for speaking tests. So all of these ducks, or all of these elements, are being linked together and linked to the standards. So with respect to beliefs about fairness, the first step for us in that is that we're doing work on localization here. So we're making sure that the items, the test items, are written and reviewed in Japan to reflect the local language learning curriculum. So there's a link to the curriculum, to reflect the level of exposure high school students in Japan can be assumed to have had to English, to be age appropriate, and to limit the content of the items to topics that Japanese high school students can be safely assumed to have experienced. So this is all addressing that question of fairness and bias to kids who may have had wider experience than normal high school students. Also associated with the idea of fairness is the degree of importance that we as the British Council place on sharing information about the test construct and the scoring criteria. So we make sure, or we want to make sure, that candidates and their teachers and their parents and the principals of their schools all understand how the examiners evaluate performances in the test. We express this with reference to the standards, so the CFR descriptors, and we communicate it in documents and videos and training targeted at those different stakeholders. The last point linked to fairness is we know that BCTS is used in Japan as an alternative entry pathway to some universities. So students who want to enter university in Japan and perhaps enter a foreign studies course, who have very good English language proficiency, but not very good Japanese literacy. So this is an opportunity for them to enter the university, and this allows for diversity of students in the institutions. So we believe that this is a valuable contribution to fairness in the context. I'm going to move on now to a case study in Singapore, and the kind of duck that I like in Singapore is duck rice. In this case study, I'll talk to you a bit about how we worked through the introduction of a new assessment into the WPLN education system in Singapore, which was an existing system, but we brought in a new assessment, and how we're starting to see the consequences of that work now. So that's that outside part that Vicky was talking about, and what Nick talked about earlier about being the impact or the washback of the assessment. So WPLN stands for Workplace Literacy and Numeracy, and WPLN is part of the Singapore government's approach to helping all Singaporeans access lifelong learning and skills development. And most WPLN candidates are people who didn't complete high school certificate courses in their teenage years. Often they left school maybe 14 or 15, went to work, probably low skill work, factories and so on. And after some time, they've decided that they want to get more vocational training in order to advance their skills and opportunities. But they can't enter the vocational training because they don't have a high school certificate. So WPLN can be used as a workaround for these people. And it's also used for students in special education sector to access vocational training. Some of you may have heard me talk about the WPLN in Hanoi in November in 2019 at the VLAS symposium, which was wonderful. Wish we were face-to-face again today, but maybe next year. So that presentation was to tell you about the work we were doing to support the introduction of those assessments. So this is just a quick piece of information about the WPLN assessments. There's 5 skill component assessments. We've got speaking, listening, reading, writing, numeracy. And again, this is a localized assessment. So we use the Aptus delivery platform and the Aptus item bank, but we've adapted the listening and the speaking components by removing or adapting items which were not appropriate for the local context and thinking about the local candidate group. If they didn't finish high school, they might not have very many opportunities to have traveled and things like that. So we really limited what was in the item bank so that we could be confident that the local candidate base wouldn't meet anything that was very strange for them. The other part of the localization was that we re-recorded the audio files, so all of the listening files and the speaking files with Singaporean voice talent, speaking to the scripts of the items, but in English as you would hear on the streets in Singapore, but standard English, if that makes sense. So a quick overview of the work that we did with the institutional alignment and the introduction of WPLN. We were introducing a new assessment into an existing WPLN environment. So there were already training providers, already trainers, already a set of standards. And our job was to bring in a new assessment, link it to the standards so that the scores still had the same meaning on the new assessment as on the old assessment, but to bring a more up-to-date approach to assessment to the system. So we did that through a standard setting event in July 2019, which meant that about 35 local WPLN expert trainers became very knowledgeable about the new assessment, and they helped us with the introducing the new assessment. And then the new assessments, so from October 2019 to February 2020, we did a lot of work with local training providers and local trainers to make sure that they understood the new assessment. And then the assessments were introduced in January 2020. And happily, we've been recording videos in Singapore over the last couple of months to collect information about the impact of the new assessments. And I'm very hopeful that I can now share with you some of that video, a small part of it. And if you could just watch and have a look and see, is there evidence of consequence of this introduction of this new assessment? Hint, there is. And what is that evidence and why am I so happy and excited to share this with you? So fingers crossed that this is going to work.
To prepare the students for the WPLN assessments, we work with them on both literacy and numeracy skills. We purchased microphones for students to practice speaking in class, and a mini stage was erected in some classrooms for students to practice speaking confidently.
I understand it is quite critical to master my English proficiency, as it will be a great help for me to socialize with people out there.
Thanks to WPLN assessment, I was able to apply for the courses that I've always wanted to study.
So I hope that that was loud and clear and that you can see that we have a tremendous evidence there of consequences, which is that in some classrooms, maybe not all, but in some classrooms, there's much increased focus on teaching speaking, on students having opportunities to practice their public speaking and develop their confidence in speaking English. So we're very, very pleased about that evidence of impact. My final case study that I'll talk to you about right now is coming from India. And this is a project that we worked on, and we were very lucky because we were able to do alignment by design in this course. So I'll talk to you about that alignment by design and also how we worked with stakeholders to address and include their principles, needs and wants and factors from the environment to deliver a successful course, which was informed by the comprehensive learning system. So in 2020 and early 2021, British Council India delivered IELTS training courses on behalf of Health Education England, which is the global training partner of the NHS. And so when we're working on a high stakes exam preparation course, we can use the scoring criteria of the exam as the standards. So if you remember, the standards are right in the middle of the comprehensive learning system. So in this course for writing and speaking, we treated the IELTS scoring criteria as the standards. However, as the students were taking IELTS for a specific purpose to go and work in the UK, we looked closer than that. So these learners needed IELTS 7 with no score below 7, except for writing, which could be a score of 6.5. So our standards were the band 7 scoring criteria for writing and speaking. And then for the receptive skills, we needed to think about the kinds of reading and listening items that are likely to cause trouble for candidates around band 6, band 7, and make sure we addressed the skills being assessed in those kinds of items. And then, so these became the standards for the receptive skills. So you can see here that we have standards in the middle and then elements around the outside. So these were all designed to link directly to the standards. So at the top, we can see class materials. The class materials in this course were a revised set of materials. We had class materials that are called IELTS Coach in British Council, but they're delivered targeting IELTS 5.5. So we revised those to target IELTS 7 so that they were directly linked to the standards. The next part is called PALS, or peer assisted learning sessions, just small group learning to complement the work that was happening in the online classes every week. Every session of PALS, or peer assisted learning, was directly and explicitly linked back to the standards so that the students knew all the time why they were doing things in the PALS class, how it was linked to the standards, and the standards were directly linked to the student goals. We have online learning materials, which is part of the British Council and Clarity English's partnership, which is called Road to IELTS. We selected materials again from Road to IELTS, which was explicitly linked back to the standards and the focus for the week. So we could always have that direct link and explicit link to the standards. The weekly homework tasks, you guessed it, IELTS writing or IELTS speaking tasks, so that the students were always focused on what they were trying to do. But we added an extra element to that, which is the feedback sheets. Now, the feedback sheets we designed from our team, from Global Assessments, and we designed them to explicitly link all feedback that the teachers gave to the students to the standards. So there was no way that a teacher, because we couldn't control everything the teachers were doing, but we wanted to make sure that every time the teacher gave feedback to the students on their writing or on their speaking, they explicitly linked that feedback to the standards. So the way that they did that was to use these 4 different sections on the writing, for example, and they had to say this practice task meets the standards or does not meet the standard or exceeds the standards for these reasons. And this is where the gap is, if there's a gap. The next section is the final assessment, which was IELTS. So it was definitely linked to all the other elements of the course. And the extensive reading club you can see up there was introduced after we piloted the course the first time round. We realized that we weren't addressing well enough the constructs at the level necessary for a band 7 reading score. So we introduced this reading club where there are a lot of texts made available through a website with links to all of these texts and recommendations on how they could be read, and then how students could practice the kinds of skills that they needed for the IELTS reading test to achieve their goal scores. Of course, this wasn't without challenges. I'm making it sound great, but there were plenty of challenges. We needed to manage learner expectations. The context was extremely challenging because these were nurses who were working in India through the height of the pandemic in India. I hope it was the height. And we also had very high client expectations to manage. We had internal business development staff who were saying, well, why are you bothering with all of these things? There's so many elements, this is so challenging. But we persisted, and in the end, it was a very successful project. And one of the reasons it was so successful was that the standards there, the course that was, the standards the course were aligned to, was 100% linked to the learner's immediate learning goals. And so that meant that we were addressing the learner's needs and their wants the whole way through the course. Now, I said it was successful, so successful that British Council India keeps coming back and saying they want it more. And British Council India has learned, along with us, that the key to a successful exam preparation course is to have this standards aligned curriculum assessment and delivery. So that brings us back to the start, as we say, Vicky, and say that the comprehensive learning system is the key to successful learner outcomes. I'll hand over to you for the implications for practitioners in Vietnam.
Thanks, Johanna. Okay, just summary, what we've been saying is that the assessment, delivery, and the curriculum based on standards, they are not independent. They must be seen as a one whole unit. And hopefully, in the next slide, please, Johanna. Some of the implications here is that obviously, and unfortunately, we often, I work, predominantly my background is assessment, we've always sort of worked in silos. The test developers are sort of secret people in the background developing tests. The curriculum people are separate people developing curriculum, and the teachers are in the teaching profession. Unfortunately, we don't work together. But in order for any education reform or any small teaching or learning intervention, we do need to work together. And that's where the first implication is any reform initiative, any intervention, we need to get all those stakeholders together in a room to understand, first of all, their needs, the environment, their principles, etc. And for us to then develop that action plan. When I mean an action plan, I mean detailed plan on how to implement, for example, how to revise a curriculum. Someone mentioned that in the chat. There needs to be, you want to revise better curriculum. What's the plan from A to B? How do you get there? And along the way, what do you need to do to stop and look at how effective it is? Look that all the stakeholders are accepting this plan, believe it to have positive changes, and then look at the effectiveness of the plan. Get some evidence. So that's really the implications, is how we go about initiatives and interventions. And also, we mentioned the fact that if the assessment is not aligned to the curriculum, we're not going to get the outcomes intended by the curriculum. If there is no speaking in the test, there will be no speaking in the classroom, or the speaking will be minimum, to say the least. We know that to be the case. There are no examples of it being an opposite case anywhere in the world that we've seen. So it really is about understanding that English is about the balance of 4 skills, not just reading and listening, because they're easy to assess, but we have to focus on the speaking and the writing so that we get that the outcomes we want for our students to be able to produce language in the 21st century in ways they need to. And just my last comment is always in the delivery. Ultimately, the learner is the center, and the learner is mostly affected by our teachers. So the teachers need to be involved in these stages, and not just generic teacher training, but real targeted teacher training on not just their needs, but their wants. So because they know best in the classroom, and they need to understand assessment more so that they can be aligned, and they need to understand the curriculum more so they can be aligned. And that means a lot more teacher training from those working on assessment and those working on curriculum. So I'll leave there, and we'll be open for questions now. Johanna, yeah?
I think so, but just before I stop sharing, I'll just let everyone know about the New Directions East Asia Conference, which is coming up in December. Early bird registration is now until the 31st of October, but there'll still be registration November and December. It's an excellent conference, and as it's online, it's more accessible for everyone. So you can come and listen to people like Professor Barry O'Sullivan, that's O'Sullivan Comprehensive Learning System, and other excellent speakers will be there as well. And we'd love to see you there and continue the conversation then. I'll stop screen sharing now, and we can hand over to questions.
All right, thank you, Joanna and Victoria. We will go ahead and take some time for questions now. Just a reminder, please be sure to type your question into the question box in your control panel.
We've got one question for from Sharon Sock. I want to use the assessment for the placement test. How can I use it? Can this test be contextualized according to the need of the school? And can you send me the link of the assessment tool?
Okay, which assessment are we referring to? Or is this assessment that they have developed in-house? Or is it one off the shelf? Like already designed test?
Okay, I'm just gonna allow Sharon to speak so you can explain yourself. Sharon, do you want to explain yourself?
Right. Type in the message or the chat box.
Sharon, or you can just type in the chat box. Sharon, you can speak now. Do you want to explain yourself?
Hello, everyone.
Hi, we can hear you.
Yeah, I just want to know any test that you have developed so far, if I can and use at my New Hope Cambodia school.
Okay, well, basically, the first question or the first thing we really need to focus on is why. What are you wanting to use the placement for? Is it to put the students into separate classes, or is it to, do you have certain classes they need to attend, or do you just want to know what sort of level they have? What would be the reasons for you to use a test, a placement test?
Yeah, thank you. The reason is to put them, to place them in the correct level, because they are going to enroll at my school in December, and I have had the test, but the test is not really recognized by like the world, like British Council, or I can see and there are tests something like that, but which test should I be using to place them in the correct level, you know? Thank you.
Okay, there's quite a lot of information that you'd need to consider. I mean, first of all, are your courses based on the CFR? And if so, then the tests themselves would need to be based on the CFR to give you those distinct levels. The other question is, of course, and a more practical question, is the budget. There are many tests out there that are quick placement tests. They're called quick placement tests, but they're only 2 skills. That's why they're so cheap. But if you need to be placed in a course where they're speaking and writing, it may not give you that accurate information you're looking for. But, you know, we have to balance in life, and that may be where your budget is. There are many aspects of what we have to consider when we look at which test is for the right purpose. There are the implications around what the test is actually measuring and whether it fits with what we'll be teaching, but also there's the budget and the limitation requirements as well, or how it's administered, paper and pen or computer. Johanna, do you want to add something about placement tests?
It was more a general comment about learning more about assessment. So if you want to learn more about assessment, right now the British Council is running a course called Language Assessment for Classroom Teachers, something like that. But it's an online course. It's many people join it, particularly from Southeast Asia. And there is active teaching from some of our colleagues, and they join chat rooms and they explain concepts, and there's a lot of learning in it. It's delivered through an online platform. Vicky, I've forgotten it for a second.
FutureLearn. I'm just trying to
FutureLearn. And we'll put the link in the chat. It just started 3 or 4 days ago. So if you sign up today, you can join for the next 4 weeks and learn about language assessment there. Might be very useful.
It's also free, I believe.
That'd be
It's
nice.
free, yeah.
That'd be nice.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much, Johanna and Victoria. Due to the limitation of time, I'm afraid we can't include all of the questions in the Q&A session, but audience, you can always email the presenters directly, I guess, right?
Yeah.
And Victoria.
And
Mhm.
also
Thank you
use
so
the
much.
Convention Cafe. I think the questions on the Convention Cafe is very helpful.
Yeah.
So
And
thank
it
you.
was a pleasure being with you today. And on
Thank you
behalf
very
of
much, everyone, for listening.
Thank you so much, and we wish you all the best and enjoy
Thank
the
you.
convention. Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.